These are the marks by which we who serve on this committee will be measured as well. Director Mueller, we have a responsibility to address the evidence that you have uncovered. You recognize as much when you said, quote, "The Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing," close quote. That process begins with the work of this committee. We will follow your example, Director Mueller. We will act with integrity. We will follow the facts where they lead. We will consider all appropriate remedies. We will make our recommendation to the House when our work concludes. We will do this work because there
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Mueller, for being here. For 2 years leading up to the release of the Mueller...
Thank you again, Director Mueller. We look forward to your testimony. It is now my pleasure to recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Mueller, for being here. For 2 years leading up to the release of the Mueller report, and in the 3 months since, Americans were first told what to expect, and then what to believe. Plain sight, even if the special counsel's team didn't find it. When Mr. Mueller
pregunto si es que alguien está viendo no escucha. ¿Hay alguien está viendo esto?
No, no he comunicado su existencia. Ya, ahora sí.
After an extended, unhampered investigation, today marks an end to Mr. Mueller's involvement in an investigation that closed in April. The burden of proof for accusations that remain unproven is extremely high, and especially in light of the special counsel's thoroughness. We are told this investigation began as an inquiry into whether Russia meddled in our 2016 election. Mr. Mueller, you concluded they did. Russians accessed Democrat servers, disseminated sensitive information by tricking campaign insiders into revealing protected information. The investigation also reviewed the president sought Russian assistance as a candidate to win the presidency. Mr. Mueller concluded he did not. His family or advisors did not. In fact, the report concludes no one in the president's campaign colluded, collaborated, or conspired with the Russians. The president wants the public narrative surrounding this investigation assumed his guilt while he knew the extent of his innocence. Volume 2 of Mr. Mueller's report details the president's reaction to the frustrating investigation where his innocence was established early on. The president's attitude toward the investigation was understandably negative, yet the president did not use his authority to close the investigation. He asked his lawyer if Mr. Mueller had conflicts that disqualified Mr. Mueller from the job, but he did not shut down the investigation. The president knew he was innocent. Those are the facts. Russia meddled in the 2016 election. The president did not conspire with the Russian, and nothing we hear today will change those facts. But one element of this story remains: the beginnings of the FBI investigation into the president. I look forward to Mr. Mueller's testimony about what he found during his review of the origins of the investigation. In addition, the Inspector General continues to review how baseless gossip can be used to launch an
Estamos partiendo esto recién, pero comentando y compartiendo por distintas redes.
Citizen or a potential or political candidate as a result of the political leanings of a handful of FBI agents. The origins and conclusions of the Mueller investigation are the same things: what it means to be American. Every American has a voice in our democracy, but must protect the sanctity of their voice by combating election interference. Every American enjoys the presumption of innocence and guarantee of due process. If we carry anything away today, it must be that we increase our vigilance against foreign election interference while we ensure our government officials don't weaponize their power against the constitutional rights guaranteed to every U.S. citizen. Finally, we must agree that the opportunity cost here is too high. The months we have spent investigating this guy...
¿Estamos al aire?
Estamos al aire, sí, estamos al aire.
¿Y la gente nos escucha?
La gente nos escucha.
Ah, ya, menos mal, que funcionó todo, menos mal.
Más o menos. Bueno, en este momento está, ya acaba de hablar, hacer la introducción el jefe de la comisión, que es el demócrata, y ahora está el jefe de la minoría de la comisión, que es el republicano. Pronto, en un par de minutos, cuando termine de hablar el republicano, ojalá que pronto, va a empezar a hablar Robert Mueller con su testimonio inicial. Y después van a empezar las preguntas. Bueno, primero, ¿quién es Robert Mueller? es el Special Counsel,
Una especie de ministro en visita, ¿no?
Una especie de ministro en visita, sí. Quien realizó la investigación de, primero, de la influencia rusa en elecciones norteamericanas y en particular en la elección de Donald Trump. Y en el camino empezó a investigar a otras personas por otros delitos asociados, como obstrucción a la justicia con respecto a esos delitos. Robert Mueller publicó un gran documento, un gran informe final de su investigación, un mamotreto, sí. A ver, baja un poquito el... Ahí están hablando un poquito la biografía de Robert Mueller. Y la gracia de ese mamotreto es que indicaba varias cosas bastante serias y graves, como por ejemplo que los rusos habían efectivamente infiltrado en buena parte la campaña de Trump. No encontró pruebas de que Trump mismo está involucrado en la acción rusa. Hay un montón de personas acusadas y tanto en juicio o ya encarceladas por haber estado con los rusos dentro de la campaña de Trump. También hay muchos rusos acusados de haber involucrado en la campaña de Trump. Ahora, el juramento.
Mueller viene a jurar.
You swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God. Let the record show the witness answered the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. Please note that your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony.
We have full confidence in the outcome. My staff and I carried out this assignment with that critical objective in mind. To work quietly, thoroughly, and with integrity so that the public would have full confidence in the outcome. The order appointing me as special counsel directed our office to investigate Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. This included investigating any links or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign. It also included investigating efforts to interfere with or obstruct our investigation. Throughout the investigation, I continually stressed two things to the team that we had assembled that could compromise the integrity of our work. All decisions were made based on the facts and the law. During the course of our investigation, we charged more than 30 defendants with committing federal crimes, including 12 officers of the Russian military.
Eso estuvo muy bueno.
7 defendants have been convicted or pled guilty. Certain of the charges we brought remain pending today. For those matters, I stress the indictments contain allegations, and every defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. In addition to the criminal charges we brought, as required by Justice Department regulations, we submitted a confidential report to the Attorney General at the conclusion of our investigation. The report set forth the results of our work, the reasons for our charging and declination decisions. The Attorney General later made the report largely public. As you know, I made a few limited remarks about our report when we closed the Special Counsel's office in May of this year. There are certain points that bear emphasis. First, our investigation found that the Russian government interfered in our election in sweeping, systematic fashion. Second, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired with the Russian government in its election interference activities. We did not address collusion, which is not a legal term. Rather, we focused on whether the evidence was sufficient to charge any member of the campaign with taking part in a criminal conspiracy, and it was not. Third, our investigation of efforts to obstruct the investigation and lie to investigators was of critical importance.
Una observación, una conspiración en la terminología gringa significa un acuerdo para cometer un delito, bien específicamente, bien restrictivo.
Es como asociación ilícita.
Sí.
Finally, as described in Volume 2 of our report, we investigated a series of actions by the President towards the investigation. Based on Justice Department policy and principles of fairness, we we decided we would not make a determination as to whether the president committed a crime. That was our decision then, and it remains our decision today. Let me say a further word about my appearance today. It is unusual for a prosecutor to testify about a criminal investigation. Given my role as a prosecutor, there are reasons why my testimony will necessarily be limited. First, public testimony could affect several ongoing matters. In some of these matters, court rules or judicial orders limit the disclosure of information to protect the fairness of the proceedings. Inconsistent with long-standing Justice Department policy, it would be inappropriate for me to comment in any way that could affect an ongoing matter. Second, the Justice Department has asserted privileges concerning investigative information and decisions, ongoing matters within the Justice Department, and deliberations within our office. These are Justice Department privileges that I will respect. The Department has released a letter discussing the restrictions on my testimony. I therefore will not be able to answer questions about certain areas that I know are of public interest. For example, I am unable to address questions about the initial opening of the FBI's Russia investigation, which occurred months before my appointment, or matters related to the so-called Steele dossier. These matters are subject of ongoing review by the department. Any questions on these topics should therefore be directed to the FBI or the Justice Department. As I explained when we closed the Special Counsel's office in May, our report contains our findings and analysis and the reasons for the decisions we made. We conducted an extensive investigation over 2 years. In writing the report, we stated the results of our investigation with precision. We scrutinized every word. We do not intend to summarize or describe the results of our work in a different way in the course of my testimony today.
Aquí básicamente está contando sobre las limitaciones que tiene con respecto a por qué no va a poder irse más allá que el texto. Ahora, el texto dice bastante.
Y también dice que va a respetar, no sé en qué medida, la carta que le mandó el Departamento de Justicia en términos de limitaciones sobre este privilegio del Ejecutivo sobre otras materias. Así que hay que ver en la práctica cómo se traduce eso en las respuestas que dé cuando le pregunten sobre el tema específico.
Mr. Zebley was responsible for the day-to-day oversight of the investigations conducted by our office. I also want to again say thank you to the attorneys, the FBI agents, the analysts, the professional staff who helped us conduct this investigation in a fair and independent manner. These individuals who spent nearly 2 years working on this matter were of the highest integrity. Let me say one more thing. Over the course of my career, I have seen a number of challenges to our democracy. The Russian government's effort to interfere in our election is among the most serious. As I said on May 29th, this deserves the attention of every American. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes.
Ahora van a comenzar con la parte de las preguntas. Cada uno de los congresistas va a tener 5 minutos para preguntas y respuestas. La suma de las preguntas más las respuestas, entonces vamos a ver las preguntas importantes.
Le dice que el presidente dijo que había no obstrucción de ningún tipo y que era una exoneración en ese sentido, pero eso no es lo que el informe dice, y Mueller confirma, no es lo que el informe dice.
Las primeras palabras de la pregunta y respuesta fue
el presidente
desmentir al presidente.
Miente.
Now, does that say there was no obstruction?
No.
In fact, we were actually unable to conclude the president did not commit obstruction of justice. Is that correct?
Well, we, at the outset, determined that we, when it came to the president's culpability, we needed to go forward only after taking into account the OLC opinion that indicated that a president, sitting president, cannot be indicted.
So the report did not conclude that he did not commit obstruction of justice. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You actually totally exonerate the president.
No.
The report expressly states that it does not exonerate the president.
It does.
Your investigation actually found, quote, multiple acts by the president that were capable of exerting undue influence over law enforcement investigations, including the Russian interference and obstruction investigations. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, Director Mueller, can you explain in plain terms what that finding means so the American people can understand it?
Esta es la parte fundamental. Ahora
The
bien,
finding indicates that the president was not that the president was not exculpated for the acts that he allegedly committed.
In fact, you were talking about incidents, quote, in which
No es muy
the
lego
president
el-
sought to use his
No,
official
es
power
muy
outside
lacónico
of
Mueller,
official
es famosamente lacónico.
undue influence over your investigation.
Al contrario de Jim Comey, por ejemplo,
Now,
que te recita una poesía y una novela.
two of your report, you wrote, quote,
Pero tiene su poder también, ¿no? Cuando está así, no, es mentira, listo.
in an obstruction of justice inquiry. At that point, the president engaged in a second phase of conduct involving public attacks on the investigation, non-public efforts to control it, and efforts in both public and private to encourage witnesses not to cooperate with the investigation. Close quote. So President Trump's efforts to exert undue influence over your investigation intensified after the president became aware that he personally was being investigated?
I stick with the language that you have in front of you,
Which,
which comes from page 7.2.
now, is it correct that if you concluded that the president committed the
Yeah.
crime of obstruction, you could not publicly state that in your report or here today?
Can you repeat the question, sir?
Is it correct that if you had concluded that the president committed the crime of obstruction, you could not publicly state that in your report or here today?
Now, I would say you could. The statement would be that you would not indict. You would not indict because under the OLC opinion, a sitting president, excuse me, cannot be indicted. Be unconstitutional.
So you could not.
O sea, exactamente lo que digo.
The OLC opinion with some guide, yes.
But under DOJ, under Department of Justice policy, the president could be prosecuted for obstruction of justice crimes after he leaves office, is correct?
True.
Thank you. But any senior White House official refuse a request to be interviewed by you.
básicamente acaban de amenazar a Donald Trump
De mejor gana la elección, de menos por la víspera ruso, porque si no, te
o ir a la
explico.
cárcel.
I would have to look at it, but I'm not certain that that was the case.
Did the president refuse a request to be interviewed by you and your team? Yes. And is it true that you tried for more than a year to secure an interview with the president? Is it true that you and your team advised the president's lawyer that, quote,
Acá están hablando sobre la cooperación del presidente con la investigación. Nula.
Yes.
and is it true that you also, quote, stated that it is in the interest of the presidency and the public for an interview to take place, close quote?
Yes.
But the president still refused to sit for an interview by you or your team?
True.
And did you also ask him to provide written answers to questions on the 10 possible episodes of obstruction of justice crimes involving him? Did he provide any answers to a single question about whether he engaged in obstruction of justice crimes?
I would have to check on that.
Director Mueller, we are grateful that you were here to explain your investigation and findings.
Como diría Han Solo,
Heard your work,
I
believe
like
anyone
this guy.
else would engage in the
No,
conduct of
su estilo lacónico también es muy poderoso.
Sí,
Your work is vitally important to this committee,
No, es
to the
mentira.
American people, because no one is
porque
above
no puedes tener una opinión emocional sobre él. Porque como tiene emociones, como un robot, entonces
Now recognize
Y es como más orientado a los hechos, entonces más, es bien potente eso.
Moving, I know, understand, we'll just
Ahora vienen las preguntas del líder de la oposición, o sea, el líder republicano, o sea, el líder de la oposición dentro de la comisión, porque como el Congreso es mayoría demócrata, las comisiones son presididas por demócratas y el líder de la oposición de la comisión es republicano. Entonces ahora este gallo va a estar defendiendo al presidente.
Since closing the special counsel's office in May of 2019, have you conducted any additional interviews or obtained any new information in your role as special counsel? Since the closing of the office in May of 2019.
The question was,
Have you conducted any new interviews, any new witnesses either? And you can confirm you're no longer special counsel, correct?
I'm no longer special counsel.
At any time of the investigation, was your investigation curtailed or stopped or hindered?
No.
Were you or your team provided any questions by members of Congress of the majority ahead of your hearing today? Your report states that your investigative team included 19 lawyers and approximately 40 FBI agents and analysts and accountants. Are those numbers accurate?
Could you repeat that, please?
40 FBI agents, 19 lawyers, intelligence analysts, and forensic accountants. Are those numbers accurate? This was included in your report.
Generally, yes.
Is it also true that you issued over 2,800 subpoenas, executed nearly 500 search warrants, obtained more than 230 orders for communication records and 50 PIN registers?
And that went a little fast.
Me dicen que la tarea está muy despacio.
In your report,
Yeah.
make this very simple. You did a lot of work, correct?
Yes, that I agree.
A lot of subpoenas, a lot
Yeah.
of PIN
A lot of
registers.
subpoenas. Yes.
Okay, we'll walk this really slow.
A lot of search warrants.
All right, a lot of search warrants, a lot of things. So you're very thorough.
You what?
Your opinion, very thorough. You listed this out in your report, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Is it true the evidence gathered during your investigation, given the questions that you have just answered, is it true the evidence gathered during your investigation did not establish that the president was involved in the underlying crime related to Russian election interference as stated in Volume 1, page 7?
We found insufficient evidence of president's culpability
So that would be a yes.
without, pardon?
That would be a yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Isn't it true the evidence did not establish that the president or those close to him were involved in the charged Russian computer hacking or active measure conspiracies, or that the president otherwise had unlawful relationships with any Russian official? Volume 2, page 76, correct?
I leave the answer to our report.
So as a yes. Is that any true your investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in the election interference activity? Volume 1, page 2, Volume 1, page 173.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Although your report states collusion is not so specific offense, and you said that this morning, or a term of art in federal criminal law, conspiracy is. In the colloquial context, are collusion and conspiracy essentially synonymous terms?
You have to repeat that for me.
Collusion is not a specific offense or a term of art in the federal criminal law. Conspiracy is.
Yes.
In the colloquial context, known public context, collusion and conspiracy are essentially synonymous terms, correct? If not, in volume 1 of your report, you wrote, as defined in legal dictionaries, collusion is largely synonymous with conspiracy, as that crime is set forth in the General Federal Conspiracy Statute 18 U.S.C. 371. You said at your May 29th press conference and here today, you choose your words carefully. Are you sitting here today testifying something different than what your report states?
Well, what I'm asking is if you can give me the citation, I can look at the citation and evaluate whether it is.
Okay, let me just be clarified. You stated that you would stay within the report. I just stated your report back to you. And you said that collusion and conspiracy were not synonymous terms. That was your answer, was no. In that, page 180 of volume 1 of your report, it says, as defined in legal dictionaries, collusion is largely synonymous with conspiracy, as that crime is set forth in general conspiracy.
Largely synonymous is not synonymous.
71. Now, you said you chose your words carefully. Are you contradicting your report right now?
Not when I read it.
So you would change your answer to yes then?
No. If you look at the language.
I'm reading your report, sir. It's a yes or no answer.
Page 180.
Page 180, volume 1. This was from your report.
Correct. And I leave it with the report.
So the report says yes, they are synonymous.
Yes.
Hopefully, for finally, out of your own
Generally
report,
synonymous.
the collusion-
Generally synonymous.
question as we're going through. Did you ever
Le pasaron el camión encima a Mueller.
countries investigated in the Russian
Mala respuesta.
interference into our election? Were other countries investigated or found knowledge that they had interference in our election?
I'm not going to discuss other matters.
That I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from California.
Director Mueller, as you've heard from the chairman, we're mostly going to talk about obstruction of justice today, but the investigation of Russia's attack that started your investigation is why evidence of possible obstruction is serious. To what extent did the Russian government interfere in the 2016 presidential election?
Could you repeat that, ma'am?
To what extent did the Russian government interfere
Café.
in the 2016
No
presidential
me
election?
hace mal el café.
Well, particularly when
Pero
it
las-
came to computer crimes
Gracias.
and the like, the government was implicated.
So you wrote in Volume 1 that the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion. You also described in your report that the then Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort shared with a Russian operative, Kalimnik, the campaign strategy for winning Democratic votes in Midwestern states and internal polling data of the campaign. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
They also discussed the status of the Trump campaign and Manafort's strategy for winning Democratic votes in Midwestern states. Months before that meeting, Manafort had caused internal data to be shared with Kalimnik, and the sharing continued for some period of time after their August meeting. Isn't that correct?
Accurate.
In fact, your investigation found that Manafort briefed Kalimnik on the state of the Trump campaign and Manafort's plan to win the election, and that briefing encompassed the campaign's messaging, its internal polling data. It also included discussion of battleground states, which Manafort identified as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Did your investigation determine who requested the polling data to be shared with Kalimnik?
Well, I would direct you to the report and adopt what we have in the report with regard to that particular issue.
We don't have the redacted version. That's maybe another reason why we should get that for Volume 1. Based on your investigation, how could the Russian government have used this campaign polling data to further its sweeping and systematic interference in the 2016
That's
presidential
a
election?
little bit out of our path.
Fair enough. Did your investigation find that the Russian government perceived it would benefit from one of the candidates winning?
Yes.
And which candidate would that be?
Well, it would be Trump.
Correct.
President.
Now, the Trump campaign
Robert
was
Mueller acaba de
exactly
decir que
reluctant to take
el que partió claro que los rusos querían que ganara Trump.
it would benefit electorally from information stolen and released through Russian efforts. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Now, was the investigation's determination, what was the investigation's determination regarding the frequency with which the Trump campaign made contact with the Russian government?
Well, I would have to refer you to the report on that.
Well, we went through and we counted 126 contacts between Russians or their agents and Trump campaign officials or their associates. So would that sound about right?
I can't say. I understand the statistic and I believe it. I understand the statistic.
Well, Mr. Mueller, I appreciate your being here and your report. From your testimony and the report, I think the American people have learned several things. First, the Russians wanted Trump to win. Second, the Russians went on a sweeping cyber influence campaign. The Russians hacked the DNC, and they got the Democratic game plan for the election. The Russian campaign chairman met with Russian agents and repeatedly gave them internal data, polling, and messaging in the battleground states. So while the Russians were buying ads and creating propaganda to influence the outcome of the election, they were armed with inside information that they had stolen through hacking from the DNC and that they had been given by the Trump campaign chairman, Mr. Manafort. My colleagues will probe the efforts undertaken to keep this information from becoming public, but I think it's important for the American people to understand the gravity of the underlying problem that your report uncovered. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
Gentlelady.
Good morning, Director.
Vamos a
If you let me
Texas.
quickly summarize your opening statement this morning. You said in Volume 1 on the issue of conspiracy, the special counsel determined that the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. And then in Volume 2, for reasons that you explained, the special counsel did not make a determination on whether there was an obstruction of justice crime committed by the president. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
All right, now in explaining that special counsel did not make what you called a traditional prosecution or declination decision, the report on the bottom of page 2 of volume 2 reads as follows. The evidence we obtained about the president's actions and intent presents difficult issues that prevent us from conclusively determining that no criminal conduct occurred. Accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. Now, I read that correctly?
Yes.
All right. Now, your report, and today you said at all times the special counsel team operated under, was guided by, and followed Justice Department policies and principles. So, which DOJ policy or principle sets forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined?
¿Tienes otro cable de
And is it true that the impact?
¿Qué pasó?
Sí, bueno.
Read the last question.
The last question was
Certainly got it accurate.
no. The last question was the language on the
No sé por qué no hay audio.
screen
Ahora
asking
volvió.
you if that's correct.
Una hueá del software.
Yes.
Okay. Does the conviction of obstruction of justice result potentially in a lot of years of time in jail?
Yes. Well, again, can you repeat the question just to make certain that I have it accurate?
Does obstruction of justice warrant a lot of time in jail
Yes.
if you were convicted?
Yes.
And is
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by reading the special counsel regulations by which you were appointed. It reads, quote, at the conclusion of the special counsel's work, he or she
Déjame
shall
apostar.
provide
Este tiene cara republicano.
a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declinations decisions reached by the special counsel. That correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when a regulation uses the word shall provide, does it mean that the individual is in fact obligated to provide what's being demanded by the regulation or statute, meaning you don't have any wiggle room, right?
I'd have to look for the statute.
Sí, eso fue racista, ¿no? No comentan por ahí.
Volume 2, page 1.
Sí.
Your report boldly states we determined not to make a traditional prosecutorial judgment. Is that correct?
I'm trying to find that citation.
Director, could you speak more directly into the microphone, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, it's volume 2, page
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Yes, volume 2, page 1, it said, we determined not to make a traditional prosecutorial judgment.
Yes.
That's right in the beginning. Now, since you decided under the OLC opinion that you couldn't prosecute a sitting president, meaning President Trump, why did we have all of this investigation of President Trump that the other side is talking about when you knew that you weren't going to prosecute him?
Well, you don't know where the investigation is going to lie, and the OLC opinion itself says that you can continue the investigation even though you are not going to indict the president.
Okay, well, if you're not going
Pero
to
buena
indict the
respuesta.
president, then you just continue fishing.
¿Por qué investigaste si es que no ibas a llegar a una acusación?
You know, sure,
Porque esas son las reglas,
sure,
como bueno.
my time is limited. Sure, you can indict other people, but you can't indict the sitting president, right?
It's true.
Okay. Now, there are 182 pages in raw evidentiary material, including hundreds of references to 302, which are interviews by the FBI, for individuals who've never been cross-examined and which did not comply with the special counsel's governing regulation to explain the prosecution or declination decisions reached, correct?
And where are you reading from on that?
I'm reading from my question.
Then could you repeat it?
Okay, you have 182 pages of raw evidentiary material with hundreds of references to 302s who were never been cross-examined and which didn't comply with the governing regulation to explain the prosecution or declination decisions reached.
This is one of those areas which I declined to discuss.
Okay, then let me...
And would direct you to the report itself.
Okay, well, I looked at 182 pages of it. You know, let me switch gears. Mr. Shabbat and I were on this committee during the Clinton impeachment. Now, while I recognize that the independent counsel statute under which Kenneth Starr operated is different from the special counsel statute, he, in a number of occasions in his report, stated that the President Clinton's actions may have risen to impeachable conduct, recognizing that it is up to the House of Representatives to determine what conduct is impeachable. You never used the term raising to impeachable conduct for any of the 10 instances that the gentlewoman from Texas did. Is it true that there's nothing in Volume 2 of the report that says that the president may have engaged in impeachable conduct?
Well, we have studiously kept in the center of our investigation our mandate.
¿Entonces tú, Felipe?
Our
Sí.
mandate does not go to other ways of
Que-
addressing conduct. Our mandate goes to developing the report and turning the report into the Attorney General.
Due respect, it seems to me, that there are a couple of statements that you made, that said that this is not for me to decide, and the implication is that this is for this committee to decide. Now, you didn't use the word impeachable conduct like Starr did. There was no statute to prevent you from using the word impeachable conduct. And I go back to what Mr. Radcliffe said, and that is that even the president is innocent until proven guilty. My time is up.
Ok, entonces lo apretaron acá los republicanos por todos lados. Uno, que Mueller se abstuvo de emitir un juicio respecto a hacer un indictment siguiendo la regla del Departamento de Justicia, pero por otro lado también escribió que no fue capaz de exonerarlo de culpa. Y los republicanos le dijeron, ¿por qué dijo eso? En el fondo estaba de más eso.
Claro.
De acuerdo a su mandato. Y lo segundo que le dicen es que esto parece importante.
Oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I'm fucked. Fucked. ¿Cómo es? ¿Cómo es la palabra?
I'm fucked.
I'm fucked. Eso dijo Trump.
Sí. Sí, la famosa cita del presidente de Estados Unidos, ¿cierto? Kennedy diciendo, not think what the country can do for you, think what you can do for your country.
Y Trump dice, I'm fucked.
Claro. This is terrible. I'm fucked.
Pleased with the special counsel, and particularly you, because of your outstanding reputation.
Correct.
Prior to your appointment, the Attorney General recused himself from the investigation because of his role in the 2016 campaign. Is that not correct? Recusal means the Attorney General cannot be involved in the investigation. Is that correct?
That's the effect of recusal, yes.
And so instead, another Trump appointee, as you know Mr. Sessions was, Mr. Rosenstein became in charge of it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Wasn't Attorney General Sessions following the rules and professional advice of the Department of Justice ethics folks when he recused himself from the investigation?
Yes.
And yet the president repeatedly expressed his displeasure at Sessions' decision to follow those ethics rules to recuse himself from oversight of that investigation. Is that not correct?
It's accurate based on what is written in the report.
And the president's reaction to the recusal is noted in the report. Mr. Bannon recalled that the president was mad as Bannon had ever seen him, and he screamed at McGahn about how weak Sessions was. Do you recall that from the report?
It's in the report, yes.
Despite knowing that Attorney General Sessions was not supposed to be involved in the investigation, the president still tried to get the Attorney General to unrecuse himself after you were appointed special counsel. Is that correct?
Yes.
In fact, your investigation found that at some point after your appointment, quote, the president called Sessions at his home and asked if he would unrecuse himself. Is that not true?
It's true.
Now, that wasn't the first time the president asked Sessions to unrecuse himself, was it?
I know there were at least 2 occasions.
And one of them was with Flynn, and one of them was when Sessions and McGahn flew to Mar-a-Lago to meet with the president. Sessions recalled that the president pulled him aside to speak alone and suggested he should do this unrecusal act. Correct?
Correct.
And then when Michael Flynn, a few days after Flynn entered a guilty plea for lying to federal agents and indicated his intent to cooperate with that investigation, Trump asked to speak to Sessions alone again in the Oval Office and again asked Sessions to unrecuse himself. True?
I refer you to the report for that.
Page 109, Volume 2. Thank you, sir. Do you know of any point when the president personally expressed anger or frustrations at Sessions?
I'd have to pass on that.
You recall, and I think it's at page 78 of Volume 2, the president told Sessions, you were supposed to protect me. You were supposed to protect me, or words to that effect.
Correct.
And is the Attorney General supposed to be the Attorney General of the United States of America or the consigliere of the president?
Eso Bob Mueller lo disfrutó.
Eso merece un...
Porque sí, tenemos efectos especiales de sonido.
I'm not going to speculate. If he, but obviously if he took over as Attorney General, he would have greater latitude.
Bueno, creo que con el aplauso creo que por acá, cuando dijo el conciliere, asumiendo que es como el abogado de la mafia
versus el Attorney General, que es como el fiscal nacional en Estados Unidos.
No.
¿O no?
No. Conciliere.
Eso.
Ya. Seguimos.
Una cosa, lo segundo que decir respecto a los republicanos es que la segunda instancia interesante donde lo apretaron a Mueller fue que, en el fondo, a pesar de que el investigador del impeachment de Clinton, el Special Counsel, habló de su informe de impeachment, Mueller no lo hizo. En ninguna parte habló escribió impeachment. Entonces, en el fondo, lo critican porque no exoneró, pero tampoco dijo impeachment. Un poco fue como ni chicha ni limonada.
This hearing today is their last best hope to build up some sort of groundswell across America.
Este es como el peinado que tenía Biden antes de ser candidato.
On page 103 of volume 2 of your report.
Sí, interesante el estilista que tiene este señor.
You reference, quote, the firm that produced Steele report, unquote. The name of that firm was Fusion GPS. Is that correct? And you're on page 103? 103, that's correct, volume 2. When you talk about the firm that produced the Steele reporting, the name of the firm that produced that was
están hablando en este momento del PPT. Del reporte que hablaba sobre el PPT.
Fusion GPS produced the opposition research document widely known as the Steele dossier, and the owner of Fusion GPA was someone named Glenn Simpson. Are you familiar with? This is outside my purview. Glenn Simpson was never mentioned in the 448-page Mueller report, was it? No, as I say, it's outside my purview and being handled in the department by others. He was not. 448 pages, the owner of Fusion GPS, that did the Steele dossier, that started all this, he's not mentioned in there. Let me move on. At the same time, Fusion GPS was working to collect opposition research on Donald Trump from foreign sources on behalf of the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. It also was representing a Russian-based company, which had been sanctioned by the US government.
Pero los republicanos están omitiendo de que la primera investigación que hicieron de oposición, que empezó con el estilo C, fueron los republicanos mismos, contra Trump.
Así es. Fue un opposition research de un par de candidaturas que se juntaron para pagar en conjunto esta investigación sobre Trump para encontrar weas y echarlo abajo de una vez. Y cuando Trump quedó de candidato, simplemente ahí estaba el trabajo hecho como la mitad, ¿cachai? Ya habían encontrado varias cosas y los demócratas siguieron pagando eso, claro.
Thank you, but you didn't mention that or her connections to Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS in your report at all. Let me move on.
Lo que está diciendo Mueller es que las teorías conspirativas están fuera del alcance de mi investigación.
Así es. O sea, no, es porque hay otras investigaciones también. Y las investigaciones que están siguiendo los datos asociados al informe Steele, que era este informe que partió como investigación de oposición, primero con los republicanos, con los demócratas sobre Trump, fue una investigación que es anterior a Trump, a Mueller. Entonces se está llevando por otras partes dentro del FBI y Mueller está tocando otros temas que salieron como sospecha desde ahí, pero también salieron como sospecha en muchas otras partes. Al final salieron como sospecha del hecho que el National Security Advisor de Trump apenas lo eligió, que estaba trabajando básicamente para los turcos y los rusos.
Claro, yo comentaba esto de teoría conspirativa porque la investigación sobre cómo empezó está siendo llevada al menos por el inspector general, que se llama, una especie de contralor dentro del Departamento de Justicia, y ya reportes de prensa habrían dicho que se habrían juntado con Christopher Steele, y su testimonio me pareció muy creíble,
sí, muy
creíble y muy serio.
That from neglecting to mention Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS's involvement with the Clinton campaign, to focusing on a brief meeting at the Trump Tower that produced nothing, to ignoring the Clinton campaign's own ties to Fusion GPS, why some view your report as a pretty one-sided attack on the president?
Well, I tell you, this is still outside my purview.
All right, and I would just note finally that I guess it's just by chance, by coincidence, that the things left out of the report tended to be favorable to the president.
Thank you, Director Mueller. I'd like to get us back on track here. Your investigation found that President Trump directed White House counsel Don McGahn to fire you. Isn't that correct?
True.
The president claimed that he wanted to fire you because you had supposed conflicts of interest. Isn't that correct?
True.
And you had no conflicts of interest that required your removal. Isn't that a fact?
Oh, correct.
And in fact, Don McGahn advised the president that the asserted conflicts were, in his words, silly and not real conflicts. Isn't that true?
I refer to the report on that episode.
Well, page 85 of Volume 2 speaks to that. And also, Director Mueller, DOJ ethics officials confirmed that you had no conflicts that would prevent you from serving as special counsel. Isn't that correct? But despite Don McGahn and the Department of Justice guidance, around May 23rd...
Don McGahn es el abogado de la Casa Blanca, el abogado principal de la Casa Blanca.
¿Sigue siendo?
Ya no. Eso. Gracias por la observación.
And McGahn declined to call Rosenstein, I'm sorry, telling the president that it would look like still trying to meddle in the investigation and knocking out Mueller would be another fact used to claim obstruction of justice. Isn't that correct?
Generally so, yes.
And in other words, Director Mueller, the White House counsel told the president that if he tried to remove you, that could be another basis to allege that the president was obstructing justice, correct?
That is generally correct, yes.
Now, I'd like to...
Sí, es como que la persona que lo está investigando despedirla, es como que sí se parece a obstruir la justicia, ¿no?
On Tuesday, June...
I'm sorry, Congressman, do you have a citation for that?
On, yes, volume 2, page 81.
Thank you.
And 82. Now, I'd like to review what happened after the president was warned about obstructing justice. It's true that on Tuesday, June 13th, 2017, the president dictated a press statement stating he had, quote, no intention of firing you, correct?
Right.
But the following day, June 14th, the media reported for the first time that you were investigating the president for obstructing of justice, correct?
Correct.
And then, after learning for the first time that he was under investigation, the very next day, the president, quote, issued a series of tweets acknowledging the existence of the obstruction investigation and criticizing it.
The tweets.
And then, on Saturday, June 17th, 2 days later, the president called...
Bueno, con los tweets de Trump podríamos dar 48 horas de testimonio.
on a Saturday to talk about you. Isn't that correct?
Right.
What was the significant... what was significant about that first weekend phone call that Don McGahn took from President Trump?
I'm going to ask you to rely on what we wrote about that.
You wrote in your report that at page 85, volume 2, that on Saturday, June 17, 2017, the president called McGahn at home to have the special counsel removed. Now, did the president call Don McGahn more than once that day?
I
think it was 2 calls.
Sorry about that.
On page 85 of your report, you wrote, quote, on the first call, McGahn recalled that the president said something like, quote, you got to do this, you got to call Rod, correct?
Right.
And your investigation and report found that Don McGahn was perturbed, to use your words, by the president's request to call Rod Rosenstein to fire him. Isn't that correct?
Well, there was a continuous...
He's asking me to do crazy shit. Eso fue lo que dijo el abogado de la Casa Blanca cuando le dio las órdenes de echar a Mueller.
Los historiadores comparan a Trump con Calígula.
Le falta el caballo.
De hecho, creo que llamó alguna vez a Don Jr., lo llamó incitatus. No. No, era. Esa era la.
Aunque si no tiene caballo, yo creo que tiene su Caddy de golf, ¿no?
Así es.
Así que el Caddy de golf va a ser nombrado ministro de alguna wea.
Sí, no, es increíble lo de Trump, el video de las juventudes trumpísticas.
De ayer.
Trumpetianas. Es impresionante. Salía como destacando que es dueño de Miss Universo y Miss Teen USA.
Deja adivinar. Este hombre es republicano. No está escuchando lo que dice. Estoy viéndolo.
The article quoted Comey as saying if the train were coming down the track, and I quote, at least Bob Mueller will be standing on the tracks with me. You and James Comey have been good friends, or were good friends for many years, correct?
We were business associates. We both started off at the Justice Department about this.
You were good friends. You can work together and not be friends, but you and Comey were friends.
We were friends.
That's my question. Thank you for getting me the answer. Before you were appointed as special counsel, when you were appointed as special counsel, was President Trump's firing of Comey something you anticipated investigating, potentially obstruction of justice?
Okay, you get into that. That's the internal deliberations in the Justice Department.
Actually, it goes to your credibility, and maybe you've been away from the courtroom for a while. Credibility is always relevant. It's always material, and that goes for you, too. You're a witness before us. Let me ask you, when you talked to President Trump the day before you were appointed as special counsel, you were talking to him about the FBI director position again. Did he mention the firing of James Comey?
Not as a candidate.
Did he mention the firing of James Comey in your discussion with him?
Not remember.
Pardon?
Not remember, and don't believe so, but I'm not going to be specific.
You don't remember. But if he did, you could have been a fact witness as to the president's comments and state of mind on firing James Comey.
I suppose that's possible.
Yeah. So most prosecutors want to make sure there's no appearance of impropriety. But in your case, you hired a bunch of people that did not like the president. Let me ask you, when did you first learn of Peter Strzok's animus toward Donald Trump?
In the summer of 2017.
You didn't know before he was hired?
I'm sorry?
You didn't know before he was hired for your team?
Know what?
Peter Strzok hated Trump. You didn't know that before he was made part of your team. Is that what you're saying?
I did not know that.
All right. When did you first learn?
When he did find out, I acted swiftly to have him reassigned elsewhere at the end.
Well, there's some discussion about how swift that was, but when did you learn of the ongoing affair he was having with Lisa Page?
About the same time
Okay.
struck.
Did you ever order anybody to investigate?
Aquí están hablando de un par de investigadores del equipo de Mueller que chatearon un poco acerca de este presidente, bueno, un maleante, una desgracia, y que es una opinión común en Estados Unidos, pero como eran personas que están investigando a Trump, claro, eso se reveló y tuvieron que sacarlos de la investigación. Eran agentes del FBI que fueron asignados de investigación y después de revelarse esos chats fueron sacados de investigación.
Pero era Strzok nomás, ¿no? Elizabeth era abogada del FBI, eran amantes y esa era la historia. Pero lo interesante de Strzok es que él fue en la serie The Americans, famosa serie The Americans, ¿sí? Él fue quien descubrió esa familia.
¿Cómo?
La serie The Americans, ¿sí? Que son espías rusos en Estados Unidos, bueno, finalmente se descubrió que era una familia.
Pero una historia ficticia.
No, pero basada en, digamos, inspirada en pero Strzok descubrió una familia, sí. Peter Strzok descubrió una familia de espías rusos infiltrados en Estados Unidos como una familia gringa.
Maravilloso, no tenía ese dato.
Strzok era, de hecho, el especialista de Mueller en
Rusia, claro.
Contrainteligencia contra Rusia.
Vean The Americans, una serie grande, muy buena. ¿Tú la viste?
Partes.
No, vean entera. Tremenda.
What he's doing is not obstructing justice. He is
¿Por qué estás gritando esto, weón?
and the fact that you granted out 2 years means you perpetuated injustice.
I take your
Gentleman's time has expired. The witness may answer the question.
I take your question.
The gentleman from Florida.
Director Mueller, I'd like to get back to your findings covering June of 2017. There was a bombshell article that reported that the President of the United States was personally under investigation for obstruction of justice. And you said in your report on page 90, volume 2, and I quote, "News of the obstruction investigation prompted the President to call McGahn and seek to have the special counsel removed," close quote. And then in your report, you wrote about multiple calls from the President to White House counsel Don McGahn. And regarding the second call, you wrote, and I quote, "McGahn recalled that the President was more direct, saying something like, call Rod, tell Rod that Mueller has conflicts and can't be the special counsel." McGahn recalled the President telling him, "Mueller has to go, and call me back when you do it." Director Mueller, did McGahn understand what the President was ordering him to do?
I direct you to what we've written in the report in terms of characterizing his feelings.
And in the report it says, quote, "McGahn understood the President to be saying that the special counsel had to be removed." You also said on page 86 that, quote, "McGahn considered the President's request to be an inflection point, and he wanted to hit the brakes, and he felt trapped, and McGahn decided he had to resign." McGahn took action to prepare to resign, isn't that correct?
I direct you again to the report.
And in fact, that very day he went to the White House, and quoting your report, you said, quote, "He then drove to the office to pack his belongings and submit his resignation letter," close quote.
That is directly from the report.
It is.
Creo que
However, he called the President's chief of staff.
fueron a buscarlo como corriendo para que no renunciara.
Steve Bannon. Do you recall what McGahn told them?
Whatever was said will appear in the report.
It is. And it says on page 87, quote, "Priebus recalled that McGahn said that the President asked him to do crazy expletives."
Shit.
In other words, crazy stuff. The White House thought that the President's request was completely out of bounds. He said the President asked him to do something crazy. It was wrong. And he was prepared to resign over it. Now, these are extraordinarily troubling events, but you found White House counsel McGahn to be a credible witness, isn't that correct?
Correct.
Director Mueller, the most important question I have for you today is why? Director Mueller, why did the President of the United States want you fired?
I can't answer that question.
Well, on page 89 in your report in volume 2, you said, and I quote, substantial evidence indicates that the president's attempts to remove the special counsel were linked to the special counsel's oversight of investigations that involve the president's conduct, and most immediately, to reports that the president was being investigated for potential obstruction of justice. Close quote. Director Mueller, you found evidence, as you lay out in your report, that the president wanted to fire you because you were investigating him for obstruction of justice. Isn't that correct?
That's what it says in the report, yes. I stand behind the report.
Dr. Mueller, that shouldn't happen in America. No president should be able to escape investigation by abusing his power. But that's what you testified to in your report. The president ordered you fired. The White House counsel knew it was wrong. The president knew it was wrong. In your report, it says there's also evidence the president knew he should not have made those calls to McGahn. But the president did it anyway. He did it anyway. Anyone else who blatantly interfered with a criminal
Este señor es muy elocuente.
like yours would be arrested and indicted on charges of obstruction of justice. Dr. Mueller, you determined...
Me llama la atención cómo hay siempre gráficas de los pedazos de texto.
Eso te iba a decir.
Solamente con los demócratas.
Sí. Cuando los republicanos citan, leen nomás. Porque no quieren que la gente lea el...
No, yo creo que eso es porque la comisión manejada por demócratas y inventaron así como un requisito de todas las quotes que vengan con tanta anticipación a nosotros van a llegar a
¿Tú crees? Yo
van a
creo
poder ser subidas.
Yo creo que es porque si cuando sacas cosas así, frasecitas y tienen que poner la página y todo, la gente va a mirar de dónde lo sacaron. No. Es porque los republicanos querían que los demócratas subieran con anticipación, que es lo que iban a contestar. Y el inverso no era cierto, porque los demócratas probablemente no le dieron acceso a los republicanos las quotes con anticipación que iban a ir para allá, entonces los demócratas ganaban, los republicanos no. Eso suena más política, más plausible, de hecho.
Voy a subir un poquito la luz.
Ya.
During his confirmation hearing.
Roma.
I'm not going to agree with what happened after the production of our report.
¿Se viene o queda puro por la...? No, queda mal.
We worked on the redacted versions together.
Did he ask you for a version where the grand jury material was separated?
Can you get into detail?
Is it your belief that an unredacted version of the report could be released to Congress or the public?
¿Cómo se ve la...?
Bajaste el volumen de la tele, creo, por lo conforme.
Chucha, ¿toqué algo?
Mira. Estoy sintiendo audio de...
Did you write the report with the expectation that it would be released publicly?
No, we did not have an expectation. We read the report, understanding that demanded by the statute and would go to the Attorney General.
Curioso. Fallo de origen.
Parece que fue de origen de oro.
And pursuant to the special counsel regulations, who is the only party that must receive a charging decision relative to special counsel's investigation? An Attorney General Barr's investigation hearing made it clear that the investigation which the public, do you remember how much of your report had been written at that point?
extent that it came through the special counsel's office, yes.
Did any single member of your team review all the underlying evidence gathered during the course of your investigation?
As been recited here today, a substantial amount of work was done with the search warrant.
My point is, there was no one member of the team that looked at everything.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay, it's fair to say that in an investigation as comprehensive as yours, it's normal that different members of the team would have reviewed different sets of documents, and few, if anyone, would have reviewed all of the underlying.
Yes.
How many of the approximately 500 interviews conducted by the special conference did you attend personally? On March 27, 2019, you wrote a letter to the Attorney General essentially complaining about the media coverage of your report. You wrote, and I quote, "The summary letter the department sent to Congress and released to the public late in the afternoon of March 24 did not fully capture the context, nature, and substance of this office work and conclusions. We communicated that concern to the department on the morning of March 25th. There is now public confusion about critical aspects of the result of our investigation." Who wrote that March 27th letter?
I can't get into who wrote it.
Would you say?
The letter stands for itself.
Okay. Letters that you would write all the Attorney General to express those concerns.
I get into that.
Did you authorize the letters released to the media, or was it not?
I have no knowledge of it.
Well, you went nearly 2 years without a leak. Why was this letter leaked? Was this letter written and leaked for the express purpose of attempting to change the narrative about the conclusions of your report? And was anything in Attorney General Barr's letter referred to as principal conclusions inaccurate? Can you answer the question, please?
And the question is?
Yes, you may answer the question.
Was anything in Attorney General Barr's letter referred to as the principal conclusions letter dated March 24th inaccurate?
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Mueller, as you know, we are focusing on 5 obstruction episodes today. I would like to ask you about the second of those 5 obstruction episodes. It is in the section of your report, beginning on page 113 of Volume 2, entitled, quote, "The President orders McGahn to deny that the President tried to fire the special counsel," end quote. On January 25th, 2018, the New York Times reported that, quote, "The President had ordered McGahn to have the Department of Justice fire you." Is that correct?
Correct.
And that story related to the events you already testified about here today. The President's calls to McGahn to have you removed, correct?
Correct.
After the news broke, did the President go on TV and deny the story?
Do not know.
In fact, the President said, quote, "Fake news, folks, fake news. A typical New York Times fake story."
Tweet.
End quote, correct?
Correct.
But your investigation actually found substantial evidence that McGahn was ordered by the President to fire you, correct?
Yes.
Did the President's personal lawyer do something the following day in response to that news report?
I refer you to the coverage of this in the report.
On page 114, quote, "On January 26, 2018, the President's personal counsel called McGahn's attorney and said that the President wanted McGahn to put out a statement denying that he had been asked to fire the special counsel," end quote. Did McGahn do what the President asked?
I refer you to the report.
Communicating through his personal attorney.
Mira, no está contestando ahora, pero está dura esta parte para Trump.
President wanted the special counsel removed. Isn't that right?
I believe it is, but I refer you again to the report.
Okay, so Mr. McCann, through his personal attorney, told the President that he was not going to lie. Is that right?
True.
Did the President drop the issue?
I refer to the write-up of this in the report.
Okay, next, the President told the White House staff secretary, Rob Porter, to try to pressure McCann to make a false denial. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What did he actually direct Porter to do?
I'll be back to you.
Okay, well, on page 113, it says, quote, "The President then directed Porter to tell McGahn to create a record to make it clear that the President never directed McCann to fire you," end quote. Is that correct?
That is, as it's stated in the report.
And you found, quote, the president said he wanted McGahn to write a letter to the file for our records, correct?
Correct.
And to be clear, the president is asking his White House counsel, Don McCann, to create a record that McCann believed to be untrue while you were in the midst of investigating the president for obstruction of justice, correct?
Generally correct.
And Mr. McCann was an important witness in that investigation, wasn't he?
You have to say yes.
Did the president tell Porter to threaten McCann if he didn't create the written denial?
I'm referring to the write-up of it in the report.
In fact, didn't the president say, quote, and this is on page 116, if he doesn't write a letter, then maybe I'll have to get rid of him, end quote.
Yes.
Did Porter deliver that threat?
Lo que en este momento está haciendo la congresista demócrata es definir bastante bien los contornos de una de las principales acusaciones de obstrucción a la justicia que existe en contra de Trump y lo está haciendo de forma bien efectiva. Aquí esto es en torno a cuando Trump intentó hacer que el abogado de la Casa Blanca lograra que el Departamento de Justicia despidiera a el mismo Robert Mueller que está ahora testificando, y Robert Mueller tiene todo el círculo de información, de órdenes y de desobedecer de órdenes. Al final Trump ordenó que este gallo fuera expulsado por la razón de que está investigando Trump, y las órdenes de Trump no fueron seguidas. O sea, él no fue expulsado finalmente.
Y encima de eso, Trump lo que intentó fue una narrativa de que jamás había intentado hacerlo, que era todo fake news, y que McCann declarara que jamás le pidió nada.
Así es, o sea, aquí Trump no solamente intentó obstruir la justicia, sino que también mintió de forma bien descarada a todo el público norteamericano.
If anyone else had ordered a witness to create a false record and cover up acts that are subject of a law enforcement investigation, that person would be facing criminal charges. I yield back my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Ohio.
Director, the FBI interviewed Joseph Mifsud on February 10,
Esto se viene
2017.
divertido.
In that interview, Mr.
¿Quién es? ¿Por qué?
Jim Jordan,
¿Qué hace de Jim Jordan?
el más infumable de los republicanos.
Ya. Vamos a escuchar con atención.
Excuse me, did you say one? I'm sorry, did you say 193?
Volume 193. You lied 3 times. You pointed out. Why didn't you charge him with the crime?
Well, I can't get into internal deliberations in regard to who would or would not be.
Charge a lot of other people for making false statements. Let's remember this. In 2016, the FBI did something they probably haven't done before. They spied on 2 American citizens associated with a presidential campaign. George Papadopoulos, Carter Page. Carter Page, they went to the FISA court. They used the now famous dossier as part of the reason they were able to get the warrant to spy on Carter Page for a better part of a year. With Mr. Papadopoulos, they didn't go to the court. They used human sources. All kinds of, from about the moment Papadopoulos joins the Trump campaign, you got all these people all around the world starting to swirl around him.
El Papadopoulos fue el que le habló a un diplomático australiano.
Australiano, sí, con escopeta en el cuerpo, diciéndole que tenía información de los rusos contra Hillary Clinton.
By the name Asperturk, even dispatched her to London to spy on Mr. Papadopoulos. In one of these meetings, Mr. Papadopoulos is talking to a foreign diplomat, and he tells the diplomat Russians have dirt on Clinton. That diplomat then contacts the FBI. The FBI opens an investigation based on that fact. You point this out on page 1 of the report. July 31st, 2016, they open the investigation based on that piece of information. Diplomat tells Papadopoulos, Papadopoulos tells the diplomat, Russians have dirt on Clinton. Diplomat tells the FBI. What I'm wondering is, who told Papadopoulos? How'd he find out?
You can't get into the evidentiary file?
Yes, you can, because you wrote about it. You gave us the answer. Page 192 of the report, you tell us who told him. Joseph Mifsud. Joseph Mifsud's the guy who told Papadopoulos. The mysterious professor who lives in Rome and London, works and teaches in 2 different universities. This is the guy who told Papadopoulos. He's the guy who starts it all. And when the FBI interviews him, he lies 3 times. and yet you don't charge him with a crime. You charge Rick Gates for false statements, you charge Paul Manafort for false statements, you charge Michael Cohen with false statements, you charge Michael Flynn, a 3-star general, with false statements. But the guy who puts the country through this whole saga starts it all for 3
El
years.
general Flynn con 3 estrellas es un traidor a los Estados Unidos.
You guys don't charge him. And I'm curious as to why.
O sea, es increíble que estén defendiendo a estos personajes, son como la cloaca de la política norteamericana. Todos ellos acusados de crímenes horrorosos relacionados con rusos u otros gobiernos extranjeros.
Did you interview Mifsud?
Can't get into that.
Is Mifsud Western intelligence or Russian intelligence?
Can't get into that.
A lot of things you can't get into. What's interesting, you can charge 13 Russians no one's ever heard of, no one's ever seen, no one's ever going to hear of them, no one's ever going to see them. You can charge them. You can charge all kinds of people who are around the president with false statements. But the guy who launches the guy who puts this whole story in motion, you can't charge him. I think that's amazing.
¿Está hablando de Vladimir Putin?
No, está hablando del profesor que habló con Pablo. Pero está coincidente.
The FBI opens the investigation July 31st, 2016, and here we are 3 years later, July of 2019. The country's been put through this, and the central figure who launches it all lies to us. You guys don't hunt him down and interview him again, and you don't charge him with the crime. Now here's the good news. Here's the good news. The president was falsely accused of conspiracy. The FBI does a 10-month investigation. James Comey, when we deposed him a year ago, told us at that point they had nothing. You do a 22-month
When we
investigation.
deposed
In that
him,
22 months, you
como si
find
fueras un
no
dictador,
conspiracy.
weón,
What's the Democrats want to
y
do?
ellos no freedom fighters,
They want to
weón.
keep investigating.
Insólito.
They want to keep going. Maybe a better
Cuando
course of
derrocamos
action-
al director
maybe a
del
better course of
FBI,
action
weón.
is to figure out how
Increíble.
the false accusation started. Maybe it's to go back and actually figure out why Joseph Mifsud was lying to the FBI. And here's the good news. Here's the good news. That's exactly what Bill Barr's doing. Thank goodness for that. That's exactly what the Attorney General and John Durham are doing. They're going to find out why we went through this 3-year saga and get to the bottom of it.
Time of the gentleman has expired. In a moment, we will take a very brief 5-minute break. First, I ask everyone
Jim
in the
Jordan,
room to
el
remain seated and quiet
representante
while the witness exit
republicano que recién habló,
I also want to
tiene una
announce to those in the
investigación,
audience
una acusación en contra sobre encubrir, cuando era director del colegio, a el profesor de lucha libre que resultó ser un pederasta.
Bueno, el zoológico de huevones que hay alrededor de esto es increíble. Bueno, ahora hay un pequeño descanso de 5 minutos en el cual vamos a estar comentando algunos resúmenes de lo que hemos visto, que les ha pasado hasta ahora y quién ha estado como mejor, que la hora sacamos provecho del testimonio y bueno, ahí avisaron claramente que nadie podía ser garantizado que se le guardara su puesto, así que básicamente dijeron que el que me le pilla ahí perdió su silla allá. Pero bueno, acá ninguno pierde su silla, estoy veloso porque estamos en este momento con sillas aseguradas, comentando sobre esto que ha pasado. ¿Cómo has visto tú, Felipe, el testimonio y las preguntas y respuestas hasta ahora? ¿Quién le ha sacado más provecho, demócratas republicanos?
Yo creo que los demócratas, pero por una razón factual nomás, que es que el reporte de Mueller efectivamente es bastante dañino para Trump.
Así
es. Y lo que están haciendo los republicanos, digamos, lo que se esperaba era tratar de atacarlo a él, en el fondo, decir que hizo un informe que fue medio ni chicha ni limonada, lo que en cierta forma es cierto, porque el tipo dijo, bueno, acá le pasó la pelota al Congreso, en el fondo. Ni siquiera habló de impeachment como el Special Counsel para el caso de Clinton lo hizo. Entonces lo que le reprochan los republicanos es, ok, tú no hablaste de impeachment siquiera, pero dijiste que tampoco lo podías exonerar, entonces en el fondo que no se le haya jugado, que en el fondo haya sido estrictamente bajo la regla y que también en el fondo que estaba de más eso de no pudo exonerarlo, dado lo que hizo finalmente. Lo que puede ser cierto, pero lo importante acá para lo que lo están logrando los demócratas es que los hechos sean repasados por Mueller, porque una cosa es que la gente se lee el mamotreto, lo único no leen mucho, pero sí ven un montón de tele.
Sí.
Entonces, distinto que Mueller diga, con todo lo lacónico que él, pero también es potente eso. ¿Es cierto que bla, bla, bla? Yes.
Claro.
¿Es cierto que mintió? Correct. Entonces...
Sí. Porque, y sobre todo porque la comparación aquí es no lo que se dice aquí frente a lo que sale en el informe, sino que lo que se dice aquí frente al marco inicial que logró establecer la administración Trump antes de que el informe se publicara. Porque el informe primero fue entregado por Mueller al Departamento de Justicia y el Attorney General recién nombrado por Trump, Barr, lo que hizo fue emitir un pequeño resumen del informe, las principales conclusiones que eran falsas. Esas eran unas conclusiones que no representaban ni el espíritu, ni la letra, ni las principales conclusiones, en verdad, del informe, y que era un resumen que era muy positivo a Trump. Entonces, ese resumen primero sale, y luego el informe sale así como un mes después. Entonces, todo ese tiempo fue de seteo comunicacional y de establecer el marco en torno a ese resumen que decía que Trump que no se había encontrado nada malo, que básicamente había sido exonerado. Y con lo cual Trump estableció eso una y otra vez en la conciencia en particular de su base. O sea, hay muchas encuestas donde tú le vas a preguntar a su base y todos están completamente seguros que el informe Mueller fue una total exoneración de Trump y de su campañña.
No
y decir que todo
collusion.
esto era fake news.
No collusion, no obstruction, no
el informe.
nothing.
El informe dice cosas bastante duras con respecto a la
Así
relación
es.
de los rusos con la campaña de Trump. No encontró que Trump mismo había participado en la conspiración entre el gobierno ruso y la campaña republicana, pero sí encontró que varias personas que trabajaban en la campaña de Trump estaban involucrados en eso, junto con muchos rusos, y otras personas fueron acusadas y están hoy o acusadas o en juicio o lisiblemente condenadas, varios de ellos, con muchas confesiones. Y por lo tanto, este seteo que se hizo, esta construcción de marco de que Trump era completamente inocente de los cargos o de los cargos que Mueller investigó, tuvo mucho tiempo sin ser contestado, porque no había ninguna manera de decir que lo que tú me estás diciendo es mentira, porque la única información que había era este resumen que había entregado el mismo gobierno de Trump. Y luego cuando el informe es publicado, ahí todo el mundo dice, oye, esto está lleno de estiércol, ¿cachai? O sea, es llena de estiércol con respecto a qué tipo de campaña llevaba este bárbaro. Entonces, ahora lo que está sucediendo es que claro, es distinto decir que la forma de comparación es o sea, que lo que se está comparando es a ver, si hay ruido, sí, no, que lo que se compara es lo que, al principio lo que se comparaba es lo que Trump había dicho sobre el informe versus nada. Después era el informe, que era un texto, versus lo que Trump había dicho tanto tiempo, que siempre había sido visual, siempre había sido con palabras simples, el informe con sus 400 páginas complejo, etc. Entonces, la gracia de este testimonio es que es la oportunidad que hay de convertir ese informe en una pieza de comunicación audiovisual que contraste el marco establecido de la total exoneración que había construido en forma falsa y engañosa el mismo gobierno de Trump. Y eso, yo creo que esto hasta ahora ha sido mucho menos efectivo de lo que pudo haber sido para lograr ese objetivo, pero sí ha avanzado en ese objetivo. Y lo fundamental es que cada pequeño avance de ese objetivo implica el perforar, al menos mínimamente, esta burbuja informativa, sobre todo en torno a la base de Trump, que está convencida de que no hay ninguna cosa mala que se haya descubierto en un informe de Mueller. Y como hay muchas cosas malas que se descubrieron en un informe de Mueller, entonces cualquier avance en dirección de mover la verdad de una manera en que sea mejor comprendida y que sea contrastada con esta mentira que ya fue instalada con tanta efectividad anteriormente, va a ser positivo electoralmente para quienes quieran sacarlo de la presidencia.
No collusion, no obstruction de Trump en la práctica fue: no podían formalizar un presidente en ejercicio, el lado de la obstrucción y en el lado de la colusión o la conspiración. Es interesante que lo que dice el informe es que no se pudo obtener suficiente evidencia como para formalizar por delito de conspiración, pero hubo contactos, hubo llamadas. Lo que pasa es que no tenían en ese momento, en retrospectiva, no tenían el wiretapping, no tenían lo que se discutió en esa llamada. Esas llamadas existieron, esos contactos existieron entre gente de la campaña de Trump y los rusos, que esas llamadas existieron, o sea, pudo acceder a los registros de las llamadas, pero no tenía precisión retrospectiva de lo que se discutió en esa llamada. Es bien importante eso, y como la teleserie gringa ya está a nivel Roma con Calígula, el nuevo canal favorito de Donald Trump se llama One News America, y la semana pasada se descubrió que uno de sus periodistas que trabajan en el nuevo canal favorito, porque Fox News era demasiado ya blando e izquierdista y socialista para Trump, tenía entre sus periodistas a un periodista que también está en la planilla del Kremlin.
Sputnik News.
Sputnik News.
El nombre y apellidos de Gallo había estado básicamente en los reportes del ecosistema mediático que había apoyado desde el Kremlin a la campaña de Trump.
Así nomás.
The page has timed out cartridge. Resume playback. Pues bueno. Pequeñas cosas que suceden en la transmisión en vivo. Se nos fue C-SPAN.
Vamos C-SPAN.
Bueno, están en pausa si no están perdiendo nada.
Vamos C-SPAN. Se me olvidó traer whisky.
Felipe Veloso, son las 10 de la mañana. Esto partió a las 8:30. No es hora de whisky.
Ups. No que estamos borrachos, ¿eh?
No,
¿Tienes té?
Tengo té, sí.
¿Té de orégano?
¿Té de orégano?
No, estoy dado
Hay gente que fuma orégano, no hay mucha gente que toma orégano.
De todo hay en la vida. Hay un montón de congresistas tuiteando, sobre todo los que acababan de preguntar. Los demócratas están todos tuiteando. Asumo que tuiteando, que están todos con el celular tipeando como van en la cabeza.
Sí, por supuesto. No, porque, o sea, todo esto es framing. Entonces todo el mundo está haciendo pins. Todo el mundo está haciendo su propio spin desde el cuento, hace su público. El público dentro de su propio público.
Mira, el señor ahí del medio se tapó la boca. Los futbolistas cuando le habló al presidente del comité judicial, así tapándose la boca, así como el futbolista. Oye, Jerry, ¿estamos bien o estamos mal?
Claro. Oye, vaya a la izquierda y llegáis
o como dijo el gran Alexis, me dijeron, ¿qué te pasa, Julio?
Bájate Messi, ya.
Yo tengo sentimientos encontrados sobre la expulsión de Gary Medel con Messi.
¿Tú no piensas que fue el film por reino?
No, mi conflicto, mis sentimientos encontrados son respecto a si valía la pena o no noquear a Messi de un combo. Porque se lo iban a expulsar igual.
Tú dices que dada que iba a hacer la expulsión, hacerla con saña. Y que sea calificatorio y que ya no quede nada.
Le iban a dar 4 fechas, yo creo. Pero si valía la pena. ¿Cómo te cae Messi a ti?
No, mal, claro. Pero.
¿Y cómo te cae el Gary?
Bien.
A mí me cae bien el Gary.
Pero.
Yo soy de hombre, yo
si el objetivo era sacar los dos y fue como.
Bueno, claro, lo que pasa es que no.
¿Por qué no será tan divertido?
Bueno, no sé.
Con empujones así ya.
Por ejemplo, no sé, en hockey se saca la cresta de todos los partidos. El gran Lionel, en el Mundial 62, el italiano lo agarró patada en el suelo.
Sí.
Se paró Lionel, y parece que Lionel era bueno para los combos porque le puso un cortito, así como tipo a Martín Vargas, así como ¡pum!
Un one punch man, así.
Claro.
No,
le puso una mano.
Un 1 inch punch.
Claro, y le puso una mano nomás, y el italiano cayó de bruces, así, ¡puff! Completamente comprometido con conciencia.
Welcome to Chile, bitch.
Claro, y le sacaron roja al italiano.
Ya. Volvimos, así que va el sonido y volvemos.
Mr. Mueller, Congressman Dutch addressed Trump's request to McGahn to fire you. Representative Bass talked about the president's request of McGahn to deny the fact that the president made that request. So I want to pick up where they left off, and I want to pick up with the president's personal lawyer. In fact, there was evidence that the president's personal lawyer was alarmed at the prospect of the president meeting with Mr. McGahn to discuss Mr. McGahn's refusal to deny the New York Times report about the president trying to fire you, correct?
Correct.
In fact, the president's counsel was so alarmed by the prospect of the president's meeting with McGahn that he called Mr. McGahn's counsel and said that McGahn could not resign no matter what happened in the Oval Office that day, correct?
Correct.
So it's accurate to say that the president knew that he was asking McGahn to deny facts that McGahn, quote, had repeatedly said were accurate, unquote. Isn't that right?
Right.
Está jugando bien ahí los
also
muros.
found, quote, by the time of the Oval Office meeting with the president was aware, one, that McGahn did not think the story was false, two, did not want to issue a statement or create a written record denying facts that McGahn believed to be true. The president nevertheless persisted and asked McGahn to repudiate facts that McGahn had repeatedly said.
Puede ser un segundo y luego sí. Voy a intentar entrar una luz con el bono un poco mejor.
Ya, me quedo a cargo del buque.
In other words,
Me cuenta qué pasa mientras en los próximos 2 minutos.
to say something that McGahn did not believe to be true.
It's accurate.
I'll reference you to a slide, and it's on page 120. And it says, substantial evidence indicates that in repeatedly urging McGahn to dispute that he was ordered to have the special counsel terminated, the president acted for the purpose of influencing McGahn's account in order to deflect or prevent further scrutiny of the president's conduct towards the investigation.
It's accurate.
Can you explain what you meant there?
I'm just going to believe it as it appears in the report.
So it's fair to say the president tried to protect himself by asking staff to falsify records relevant to an ongoing investigation.
I would say that's generally a summary.
Eso está buenísimo.
The president tried to handle the investigation by asking staff to falsify records relevant to your
Just
investigation.
going to refer you to the report, if I could, for review of that episode.
Thank you. Also, the president's attempt to get McGahn to create a false written record were related to Mr. Trump's concerns about your obstruction of justice inquiry, correct?
I believe that to be true.
In fact, at that same Oval Office meeting, the president also asked McGahn why he had told, quote, why he had told special counsel's office investigators that the president told him to have you removed, unquote.
And what was the question, sir?
Let me go to the next one. The president, quote, criticized McGahn for telling your office about the June 17, 2017 events when he told McGahn to have you removed, correct?
Correct.
In other words, the president was criticizing his White House counsel for telling law enforcement officials what he believed to be the truth.
I again go back to the text of the report.
Lo importante es que este congresista demócrata le sacó a Mueller que el presidente mandó a falsificar instrumento público para cambiar la narrativa. Sí, en realidad es general cierto.
Excelente. Bueno, lo logramos al descanso, claro. Que todo el relato que se había hecho en torno al informe inicial, antes de que el informe fuera públicamente publicado, digamos, fue falso. Muy bien.
Especially his counsels, to take notes during the meeting, correct?
I rely on the wording of the report.
Well, thank you Director Mueller for your investigation into whether the president attempted to obstruct justice by ordering his White House counsel, Don McGahn, to lie to protect the president, and then to create a false record about it. It is clear that any other person who engaged in such conduct would be charged with a crime. We will continue our investigation and we will hold the president accountable because no one is above the law.
The gentleman from Florida. Director Mueller, can you state with confidence that the Steele dossier was not part of Russia's disinformation campaign?
No, as I said in my opening statement, that part of the building of the case predated me, and by at least 10 months.
Yeah, I mean, Paul Manafort's alleged crimes regarding tax evasion predated you. You had no problem charging them. And matter of fact, this Steele dossier predated the Attorney General, and he didn't have any problem answering the question. When Senator Cornyn asked the Attorney General the exact question I asked you, Director, the Attorney General said, and I'm quoting, "No, I can't state that with confidence." And that's one of the areas I'm reviewing. I'm concerned about it, and I don't think it's entirely speculative. Now, if something is not entirely speculative, then it must have some factual basis, but you identify no factual basis regarding the dossier or the possibility that it was part of the Russia disinformation campaign. Now, Christopher Steele's reporting is referenced in your report. Steele reported to the FBI that senior Russian foreign ministry figures, along with other Russians, told him that there was, and I'm quoting from the Steele dossier, extensive evidence of conspiracy between the Trump campaign team and the Kremlin. So here's my question. Did Russians really tell that to Christopher Steele, or did he just make it all up and was he lying to the FBI?
Let me back up a second, if I could, say, as I said earlier, with regard to the Steele, that's beyond my purview.
No, it is exactly your purview, Director Mueller, and here's why. Only one of two things is possible, right? Either Steele made this whole thing up and there were never any Russians telling him of this vast criminal conspiracy that you didn't find, or Russians lied to Steele. Now, if Russians were lying to Steele to undermine our confidence in our duly elected president, that would seem to be precisely your purview, because you stated in your opening that the organizing principle was to fully and thoroughly investigate Russia's interference. But you weren't interested in whether or not Russians were interfering through Christopher Steele. And if Steele was lying, then you should have charged him with lying like you charged a variety of other people, but you say nothing about this in your report.
Well, sir.
Meanwhile, Director, you're quite loquacious on other topics. You write 3,500 words about the June 9 meeting between the Trump campaign and Russian lawyer Veselnitskaya. You write on page 103 of your report that the president's legal team suggested, and I'm quoting from your report, that the meeting might have been a setup by individuals working with the firm that produced the Steele reporting. So I'm going to ask you a very easy question, Director Mueller. On the week of June 9, who did Russian lawyer Veselnitskaya meet with more frequently? The Trump campaign or Glenn Simpson, who was functionally acting as an operative for the Democratic National Committee?
Well, what I think is missing here is the fact that this is under investigation elsewhere in the Justice Department. And if I can finish this, and consequently it's not within my purview, Department of Justice and FBI should be responsive to questions on this particular issue.
It is absurd to suggest that an operative for the Democrats was meeting with this Russian lawyer the day before, the day after the Trump Tower meeting, and yet that's not something you referenced. Now, Glenn Simpson testified under oath. He had dinner with Veselnitskaya the day before and the day after this meeting with the Trump team. Do you have any basis, as you sit here today, to believe that Steele was lying?
As I said before, and say again, it's not my purview. Others are investigating what you
So it's not your purview to look into whether or not Steele's lying. It's not your purview to look into whether or not anti-Trump Russians are lying to Steele. And it's not your purview to look at whether or not Glenn Simpson was meeting with the Russians the day before and the day after you write 3,500 words about the Trump campaign meeting. So I'm wondering how these decisions are guided. I look at the Inspector General's report. I'm citing from page 404 of the Inspector General's report. It states, Page stated, Trump's not ever going to be president, right? Right. Strzok replied, no, he's not. We'll stop it. Also in the Inspector General's report, there's someone identified as Attorney Number 2. Attorney Number 2, this is page 419, replied, hell no, and then added, Viva la resistance. Attorney Number 2 in the Inspector General's report and Strzok both worked on your team, didn't they?
Pardon me? Yes.
They both worked on your team, didn't they?
I know, I heard struck. Who else were you talking about?
Attorney number 2 identified in the Inspector General's report.
And the question was?
Did he work for you? The guy who said Viva la Resistance?
Peter Strzok worked for me for a period of time, yes.
Yeah, but so did the other guy that said Viva la Resistance. And here's what I'm kind of noticing, Director Mueller. When people associated with Trump lied, you threw the book at them. When Christopher Steele lied, nothing. And so it seems to be that when Glenn Simpson met with Russians, nothing. When the Trump campaign met with Russians, 35 maybe the reason why there are this discrepancies in what you focused on is because the team
Time of the gentleman is expired. Mr. Jeffries of New York is recognized.
Mr. Mueller, obstruction of justice is a serious crime that strikes at the core of an investigator's effort to find the truth, correct?
Correct.
The crime of obstruction of justice has 3 elements, true?
True.
The first element is an obstructive act, correct?
Correct.
An obstructive act could include taking an action that would delay or interfere with an ongoing investigation as set forth in Volume 2, page 87 and 88 of your report, true?
I'm sorry, could you again repeat the question?
An obstructive act could include taking an action that would delay or interfere with an ongoing investigation.
That's true.
Your investigation found evidence that President Trump took steps to terminate the special counsel, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Mueller, does ordering the termination of the head of a criminal investigation constitute an obstructive act?
That would be,
Let me refer you
to the report.
Let me refer you to page 87 and 88 of Volume 2, where you conclude the attempt to remove the special counsel would qualify as an obstructive act if it would naturally obstruct the investigation and any grand jury proceedings that might flow from the inquiry, correct?
Yes, I've got that now. Thank you.
Thank you. The second element of obstruction of justice is the presence of an obstructive act in connection with an official proceeding, true?
True.
Does the special counsel's criminal investigation into the potential wrongdoing of Donald Trump constitute an official proceeding?
And that's an area which I cannot get into.
Okay, President Trump tweeted on June 16, 2017, quote, "I am being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director. Witch hunt." June 16 tweet just read was cited on page 89 in Volume 2, constitutes a public acknowledgement by President Trump that he was under criminal investigation, correct?
I think generally correct.
One day later, on Saturday, June 17th, President Trump called White House counsel Don McGahn at home and directed him to fire the special counsel, true?
I believe it to be true. I think I may have stated in response to questions some.
That is correct. President Trump told Don McGahn, quote, "Mueller has to go," close quote, correct?
Correct.
Your report found on page 89, Volume 2, that substantial evidence indicates that by June 17th, the president knew his conduct was under investigation by a federal prosecutor who could present any evidence of federal crimes to a grand jury, true? The third element, second element having just been satisfied, the third element of the crime of obstruction of justice is corrupt intent, true?
True.
Corrupt intent exists if the president acted to obstruct an official proceeding for the improper purpose of protecting his own interests, correct?
That's generally correct.
Thank you.
The only thing I would say is we are going through the 3 elements of the proof of the obstruction of justice charges. When the fact of the matter is, we got. Excuse me, just one second.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mueller. Let me move on in the interest of time. Upon learning about the appointment of the special counsel, your investigation found that Donald Trump stated to the then Attorney General, quote, "Oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I'm effed." Is that correct?
Correct.
Is it fair to say that Donald Trump viewed the special counsel's investigation into his conduct as adverse to his own interests?
I think that generally is true.
The investigation found evidence, quote, that the president knew that he should not have directed Don McGahn to fire the special counsel, correct?
And where do you have that quote?
Page 90, Volume 2. There's evidence that the president knew he should not have made those calls to McGahn, close quote.
I see that, yes, that's accurate.
The investigation also found substantial evidence that President Trump repeatedly urged McGahn to dispute that he was ordered to have the special counsel terminated, correct?
Correct.
The investigation found substantial evidence that when the president ordered Don McGahn to fire the special counsel and then lie about it, Donald Trump, 1, committed an obstructive act, 2, connected to an official proceeding, 3, did so with corrupt intent. Those are the elements of obstruction of justice. This is the United States of America. No one is above the law. No one. The president must be held accountable one way or the other.
But let me just say, if I might, I don't subscribe necessarily to your the way you analyze that. I'm not saying it's out of the ballpark, but I'm not supportive of that analytical charge.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mueller over here. Hi. I want to start by thanking you for your service. You joined the Marines and led a rifle platoon in Vietnam, where you earned a Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and other commendations. You served as an assistant United States attorney leading the homicide unit here in D.C., U.S. attorney for the District of Massachusetts and later Northern District of California, assistant attorney general for DOJ's criminal division, and the FBI director. So thank you. I appreciate that. But having reviewed your biography, it puzzles me why you handled your duties in this case the way you did. The report contradicts what you taught young attorneys at the Department of Justice, including to ensure that every defendant is treated fairly, or as Justice Sutherland said in the Berger case, a prosecutor is not the representative of an ordinary party to a controversy, but of a sovereignty, whose interest in a criminal prosecution is not that it shall win a case, but that justice shall be done, and that the prosecutor may strike hard blows, but he is not at liberty to strike foul ones. By listing the 10 factual situations and not reaching a conclusion about the merits of the case, you unfairly shifted the burden of proof to the president, forcing him to prove his innocence while denying him a legal forum to do so. And I've never heard of a prosecutor declining a case and then holding a press conference to talk about the defendant. You noted 8 times in your report that you had a legal duty under the regulations to either prosecute or decline charges. Despite this, you disregarded that duty. As a former prosecutor, I'm also troubled with your legal analysis. You discussed 10 separate factual patterns involving alleged obstruction, and then you failed to separately apply the elements of the applicable statutes. I looked at the 10 factual situations and I read the case law. And I have to tell you, just looking at the Flynn matter, for example, the 4 statutes that you cited for possible obstruction, 1503, 1505, 1512b3, and 1512c2, when I look at those concerning the Flynn matter, 1503 is inapplicable because there wasn't a grand jury or trial jury impaneled, and Director Comey was not an officer of the court as defined by the statute. Section 1505 criminalizes acts that would obstruct or impede administrative proceedings as those before Congress or an administrative agency. The Department of Justice Criminal Resource Manual states that the FBI investigation is not a pending proceeding. 1512b3 talks about intimidation, threats, or force to tamper with a witness. General Flynn at the time was not a witness, and certainly Director Comey was not a witness. And 1512c2 talks about tampering with a record. And as Joe Biden described the statute as being debated on the Senate floor, he called this a statute criminalizing document shredding, and there's nothing in your report that alleges that the president destroyed any evidence. So what I have to ask you, and what I think people are working around in this hearing is, let me lay a little foundation for it. The ethical rules require that a prosecutor have a reasonable probability of conviction to bring a charge. Is that correct?
Sounds generally accurate.
Okay. And the regulations concerning your job as special counsel state that your job is to provide the Attorney General with a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declination decisions reached by your office. You recommended declining prosecution of President Trump and anyone associated with his campaign because there was insufficient evidence to convict for a charge of conspiracy with Russian interference in the 2016 election. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Was there sufficient evidence to convict President Trump or anyone else with obstruction of justice?
We did not make that calculation.
How could you not have made the calculation with the regulation?
The OLC opinion, Office of Legal Counsel, indicates that we cannot indict a sitting president. So one of the tools that a prosecutor would use is not there.
Okay, but let me just stop. You made the decision on the Russian interference. You couldn't have indicted the president on that, and you made the decision on that. But when it came to obstruction, you threw a bunch of stuff up against the wall to see what would stick. And that is fundamentally unfair.
I would not agree to that characterization at all. What we did is provide to the Attorney General in the form of a confidential memorandum our understanding of the case. Those cases that were brought, those cases were declined, and that one case where the president cannot.
From Rhode Island.
Director, as you know, we are specifically focused on 5 separate obstruction episodes here today. I'd like to ask you about the 3rd episode. It's the section of your report entitled "The President's Efforts to Curtail Special Counsel Investigation," beginning at page 90.
Si no me
And by
ven,
curtail, you mean limit,
ya
correct?
volvemos.
My colleagues have walked through how the president tried to have you fired through the White House counsel, and because Mr. McGahn refused the order, the president asked others to help limit your investigation. Is that correct?
Ahora te veo.
And was Corey Lewandowski one such individual?
And again, can you remind me what character?
Well, Corey Lewandowski is the president's former campaign manager, correct?
Correct.
Did he have any official position in the Trump administration?
I don't believe so.
Your report describes an incident in the Oval Office involving Mr. Lewandowski on June 19, 2017, at volume 2, page 91. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, what's the citation, sir?
Page 91.
Of the 2nd volume?
Yes.
And
A meeting in the Oval Office between Mr. Lewandowski and the president.
Okay.
And that was just 2 days after the president called Don McGahn at home and ordered him to fire you. Is that correct?
Apparently so.
So right after his White House counsel, Mr. McGahn, refused to follow the president's order to fire you, the president came up with a new plan. And that was to go around all of his senior advisors and government aides to have a private citizen try to limit your investigation. What did the president tell Mr. Lewandowski to do? Do you recall he dictated a message to Mr. Lewandowski for Attorney General Sessions and asked him to write it down? Is that correct?
True.
And did you and your team see this handwritten message?
I'm not going to get into what we may or may not have included in our investigation.
Okay, the message directed Sessions to give, and I'm quoting from your report, to give a public speech saying that he planned to meet with the special prosecutor to explain this is very unfair and let the special prosecutor move forward with investigating election meddling for future elections. That's at page 91. Is that correct?
Yes, I see that. Thank you. Yes, it is.
In other words, Mr. Lewandowski, a private citizen, was instructed by the President of the United States to deliver a message from the President to the Attorney General that directed him to limit your investigation, correct?
Correct.
And at this time, Mr. Sessions was still recused from oversight of your investigation, correct?
I'm sorry, could you restate?
The Attorney General was recused from oversight.
Yes.
So the Attorney General would have had to violate his own department's rules in order to comply with the President's order, correct?
Well, I'm not going to get into the subsidiary details.
Okay.
I just refer you again to page 91, 92 of the report.
And if the Attorney General had followed through with the President's request, Mr. Mueller, it would have effectively ended your investigation into the President and his campaign, as you note on page 97, correct?
Could you...
At page 97, you write, and I quote, "Taken together, the President's directives indicate that Sessions was being instructed to tell the special counsel to end the existing investigation into the President and his campaign, with the special counsel being permitted to move forward with investigating election meddling for future elections." Is that correct?
Generally true. Yes, sir.
And it's
Ahora, como
an
el sonido se
unsuccessful
arregló,
attempt to obstruct
podemos
justice is
tener
still a crime. Is that correct?
esto andando. Porque
That
antes
is
estaba
correct.
agarrando el micrófono
And
en la
Mr.
cámara. Además del
Lewandowski
micrófono
tried to meet with the Attorney General. Is that right?
True.
And he meet with them in his office so he would be sure
Esto, por
certain it
supuesto, es
wasn't a
también un
public
testeo.
log
Estamos
of the visit.
probando los equipos.
What we gathered for the
Estamos
report.
probando los
And the meeting
micrófonos.
never happened, and the
¿Cómo nos
president
escuchan?
raised the
Buena
issue
cámara.
again with Mr. Lewandowski, and this time he said, and I quote, if Sessions does not meet with you...
Hace algunos meses hicimos esto mismo con una webcam y un micrófono USB cagón. Ahora estamos con micrófonos más profesionales, con un mixer, con una cámara, con el software el mismo. Entonces hay muchas más variables involucradas y efectivamente había una que se nos había pasado. Así que ahora lo arreglamos.
Resuelto eso y el ruido exterior que teníamos hace un rato, ¿cómo nos escuchan ahora? ¿Se escucha bien?
¿Se escucha mejor? ¿Se escucha mejor?
The
Voy a
president
subir.
directed a private citizen to tell the Attorney General of the United States, who was recused at the time, to limit your investigation to future elections, effectively ending your investigation into the 2016 Trump campaign. Is that correct?
I'm not going to adopt your characterization. I'll say that the facts as laid out in the report are accurate.
Well, Mr. Mueller, in your report, you in fact write at page 97, substantial evidence indicates that the president's effort to have Sessions limit the scope of the special counsel's investigation to future elections interference was intended to prevent further investigative scrutiny of the president and his campaign conduct. Is that correct?
Generally.
And so, Mr. Mueller, you have seen the letter where 1,000 former Republican and Democratic federal prosecutors have read your report and said anyone but the president who committed those acts would be charged with obstruction of justice. Do you agree with those former colleagues, 1,000 prosecutors who came to that conclusion?
Those prosecutors.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over here. Thanks. Mr. Mueller, you guys, your team wrote in the report, quote, this is the top of page 2, volume 1, also on page 173, by the way. You said that you'd come to the conclusion that, quote, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities, close quote. That's an accurate statement, right?
That's accurate.
And I'm curious, when did you personally come to that conclusion?
Can you remind me which paragraph you're adverting to?
Top of page 2.
On 2?
Volume 1.
Okay. And exactly which paragraph are you looking at on 2?
The investigation did not establish.
Of course. I see it. Yes.
See it?
What was your question?
My question now is, when did you personally reach that conclusion?
Well, we were ongoing for 2 years.
Right, you were ongoing, you wrote it at some point during that 2-year period, but at some point you had to come to a conclusion that that I don't think that there's not a conspiracy going on here. There was no conspiracy between this president. I'm not talking about the rest of the president's team. I'm talking about this president and the Russians.
As you understand, developing a criminal case, you get pieces of information, witnesses, and the like, as you make your case.
Right.
And when you make a decision on a particular case depends on a number of factors.
Right, I understand.
So I cannot say specifically that we reached a decision on a particular defendant at a particular point in time.
But it was some time well before you wrote the report, fair enough? I mean, you wrote the report dealing with a whole myriad of issues. Certainly at some time prior to that report is when you reached the decision that, okay, with regard to the president himself, I don't find anything here. Fair enough?
Well, I'm not certain I do agree with that.
So you waited till the last minute when you were actually writing the report and say, oh, okay.
No, but there are various aspects of a development of
Sure, and that's my point. There are various aspects that happen, but somewhere along the pike, you will come to a conclusion. There's no there for this defendant. Isn't that right? So apparently,
I can't speak.
You can't say when. Fair enough. So you know, I'm asking the sworn witness. Mr. Mueller, evidence suggests that on May 10th, 2017, at approximately 7:45 a.m., 6 days before the DAG, Deputy Attorney General, appointed you special counsel, Mr. Rosenstein called you and mentioned the appointment of a special counsel. Not necessarily that you'd be appointed, but that you had a discussion of that. Is that true? May 10th, 2017.
I don't have any. I don't have any knowledge of that occurring.
You don't have any knowledge, or you don't recall?
I don't have any knowledge.
Evidence also suggests.
Given that what I saw you do, are you questioning that?
Well, I just find it intriguing. Let me just tell you that there's evidence that suggests that that phone call took place and that that's what was said. So let's move to the next question. Evidence suggests that also on May 12, 2017, 5 days before the DAG appointed you special counsel, you met with Mr. Rosenstein in person. Did you discuss the appointment of a special counsel then? Not necessarily that you, but that there would be a special counsel.
I've gone into waters that don't allow me to give you an answer to that particular question. It relates to the internal discussions he would have in terms of indicting an individual.
It has nothing to do with indictment. It has to do with special counsel and whether you discussed that with Mr. Rosenstein. Evidence also suggests that on May 13th, 4 days before you were appointed special counsel, you met with former Attorney General Sessions and Rosenstein, and you spoke about special counsel. Do you remember that?
Not offhand, no.
Okay. And on May 16th, the day before you were appointed special counsel, you met with the President and Rod Rosenstein. Do you remember having that meeting?
Yes.
And discussion of the position of FBI director took place. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And did you discuss at any time in that meeting Mr. Comey's termination?
No.
Did you discuss at any time in that meeting the potential appointment of a special counsel? Not necessarily you, but just in general terms.
I can't get into the discussions on that.
How many times did you speak to Mr. Rosenstein before May 17th, which is the day you got appointed, regarding the appointment of special counsel? How many times prior to that did you discuss?
I can't tell you how many times.
Is that because you don't recall, or are you just?
I do not recall.
Okay, thank you. How many times did you speak with Mr. Comey about any investigations pertaining to Russia prior to May 17, 2017? Did you have any?
Not at all.
Zero?
Zero.
Okay. Now, my time has expired, so...
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from California.
Director Mueller, going back to the president's obstruction via Corey Lewandowski, it was referenced that 1,000 former prosecutors who served under Republican and Democratic administrations with 12,000 years of federal service wrote a letter regarding the president's conduct. Are you familiar with that letter?
I've read about that letter, yes.
And some of the individuals who signed that letter, the statement of former prosecutors, are people you worked with. Is that right?
Quite probably, yes.
People that you respect?
Quite probably, yes.
And in that letter, they said all of this conduct, trying to control and impede the investigation against the president by leveraging his authority over others, is similar to conduct we have seen charged against other public officials and people in powerful positions. Are they wrong?
They have a different case.
Do you want to sign that letter, Director Mueller?
They have a different case.
Director Mueller, thank you for your service, going all the way back to the 60s when you courageously served in Vietnam. Because I have a seat on the Intelligence Committee, I'll have questions
Eric
later.
Swalwell
Because of our limited
es el buen
time,
que se salió de la candidatura presidencial ya, ¿no es cierto?
Así es.
Él fue candidato presidencial, uno de los 50 que nunca llegaron a hacer nada en relevante, y se bajó hace poquito. Creo que el primero que se baja. Sí. Al menos de los demócratas. El empresario, el Schultz, el de Starbucks, creo que también se bajó, o suspendió su candidatura, que es la manera de bajarse. Pero dentro de la primera demócrata, claro, Eric Swalwell bajó hace poco. Él fue el que en el debate le dijo él fue el que en el debate le dijo a Biden que era un viejo culiado y que tenía que dar la opción a la nueva generación, tal como el mismo Biden lo había dicho cuando era joven. El único momento ni siquiera destacable, sino que llamativo de su campaña. No fue tan buena intervención de él tampoco en ese debate.
Correct.
Let's turn now to the second element of the crime of obstruction of justice, which requires a nexus to an official proceeding. Again, I'm going to direct you to page 97, the same page of volume 2, and you wrote, quote, by the time of the president's initial one-on-one meeting with Lewandowski on June 19, 2017, the existence of a grand jury investigation supervised by the special counsel was public knowledge. That's in the report, correct?
Correct.
That would constitute evidence of a nexus to an official proceeding because a grand jury investigation is an official proceeding, correct?
Well, yes.
Okay. I'd like to now turn to the final element of the crime of obstruction of justice. On that same page, page 97, do you see where there's the intent section on that page?
I do see that.
Part C. All right. Would you be willing to read the first sentence?
And that was starting with
Substantial evidence.
indicates that the president's.
Yeah, if you could read that first sentence, would you be willing to do that?
I'm happy to have you read it.
Okay, I will read it then. You wrote, quote, substantial evidence indicates that the president's effort to have Sessions limit the scope of the special counsel's investigation to future election interference was intended to prevent further investigative scrutiny of the president's and his campaign's conduct, unquote. That's in the report, correct?
That is in the report, and I rely what's in the report to indicate what's happened in the paragraphs that we've been discussing.
Thank you. So to recap what we've heard, we have heard today that the president ordered former White House counsel Don McGahn to fire you. The president ordered Don McGahn to then cover that up and create a false paper trail. And now we've heard the president ordered Corey Lewandowski to tell Jeff Sessions to limit your investigation so that he, you stop investigating the president.
Cosa que
So
son
I believe
mayoría.
a reasonable
Claro,
person
entonces, claro,
looking
como son mayoría,
at
eventualmente
these
iba a ir a,
facts
Se le va a
could
acabar el
conclude that all
dos
three
demócratas
elements
seguidos
of the
eventualmente.
crime of obstruction of justice have been met. And I'd like to ask you, the reason again that you did not indict Donald Trump is because of OLC opinion stating that you cannot indict a sitting president, correct?
That is correct.
The fact that the orders by the president were not carried out, that is not a defense to obstruction of justice because the statute itself is quite broad. It says that as long as you endeavor or attempt to obstruct justice, that would also constitute a crime.
I'm not going to get into that at this juncture.
Okay, thank you. And based on the evidence that we have heard today, I believe a reasonable person could conclude that at least 3 crimes of obstruction of justice by the president occurred. We're going to hear about 2 additional crimes, and that would be the witness tamperings of Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort.
All that,
I yield back.
the only thing I want to add is that I'm going through the elements with you does not mean that I subscribe to what you're trying to prove through those elements.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The gentlelady from Arizona. I'm sorry, gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mueller, over here. Thanks for joining us today. You had 3 discussions with Rod Rosenstein about your appointment as special counsel, May 10th, May 12th, and May 13th, correct?
If you say so, I have no reason to dispute that.
Then you met with the president on the 16th with Rod Rosenstein present, and then on the 17th you were formally appointed as special counsel. Were you meeting with the president on the 16th with knowledge that you were under consideration for appointment to special counsel?
I did not believe I was under consideration for counsel. I had served 2 terms as FBI director.
So the answer is no.
And the answer is no.
Greg Jarrett describes your office as the team of partisans. And as additional information is coming to light, there's a growing concern that political bias caused important facts to be omitted from your report in order to cast the president unfairly in a negative light. For example, John Dowd, the president's lawyer, leaves a message with Michael Flynn's lawyer on November 17th of 2017, November 2017. The edited version in your report makes it appear that he was improperly asking for confidential information, and that's all we'd know from your report, except that the judge in the Flynn case ordered the entire transcript released, in which Dowd makes it crystal clear that's not what he was suggesting. So my question is, why did you edit the transcript to hide the exculpatory part of the message?
No es cierto lo que está diciendo el tipo.
With your characterization is that we did anything to hide.
¿Por qué?
Well, you omitted it.
Porque,
you quoted the part where he says we need some kind of heads up just
es
for the
como
sake
cuando
of
dice,
protecting all of
es
our
como cuando
interests if we
dicen,
can, but you
Davor, no es
omitted
que te estoy amenazando, pero si le pasara algo a tu mamá, por ejemplo, sería muy desafortunado. Te estoy dejando claro que no te estoy amenazando, que no te estoy
You
presionando.
extensively
Eso
discussed
es lo que está
Konstantin
diciendo.
Klemnik's activities with Paul Manafort. You describe him as, quote, a Russian-Ukrainian political consultant and longtime employee of Paul Manafort, assessed by the FBI to have ties to Russian intelligence. And again, that's all we know from your report, except we've since learned from news articles that Klemnik was actually a U.S. State Department intelligence source, yet nowhere in your report is he so identified. Why was that fact?
I don't necessarily credit what you're saying,
occurred.
¿El testimonio frente a la Comisión de Inteligencia es público o cerrado?
I'm not going to go in the ins and outs of what we had in the court.
Porque eso es lo fregado, porque se refiere a la parte de la investigación que no está en el reporte y que tiene que ver no con crímenes, sino que con contrainteligencia. En el fondo, está Trump tomado...
No, pero hay 3/4 de la respuesta para hacer, no puedo decir eso por razón de inteligencia.
Claro, pero va a tener airtime, va a tener cobertura. Entonces, en el fondo, si es que a Trump lo tienen del saco escrotal desde Rusia. Perdonen por lo explícito del lenguaje.
Probablemente el saco escrotal de Trump tiene que estar en algún jarro en Moscú.
O al menos uno de los dos testículos.
O fotografías muy en primer plano. Fotografías que por supuesto espero que jamás se revelen a la base, a la inteligencia de Estado, el secreto de Estado y abajo Wikileaks, para nunca tener que ver ese tipo de fotografías.
Dispute your characterization of what occurred in that proceeding.
In fact, the judge considered holding prosecutors in criminal contempt. She backed off only after your hastily called press conference the next day in which you retroactively made the distinction between the Russian government and the Russia troll farms. Did your press conference of May 29th have anything to do with the threat to hold your prosecutors in contempt the previous day for publicly misrepresenting the evidence?
What was the question?
The question is, did your May 29th press conference have anything to do with the fact that the previous day the judge threatened to hold your prosecutors in contempt for misrepresenting evidence?
No.
You know, the fundamental problem is, as I said, we've got to take your word. Your team faithfully, accurately, impartially, and completely described all of the underlying evidence in the Mueller report, and we're finding more and more instances where this just isn't the case. And it's starting to look like, having desperately tried and failed to make a legal case against the president, you made a political case instead. You put it in a paper sack, lit it on fire, dropped it on our porch, rang the doorbell, and ran.
I don't think you reviewed a report that is as thorough, as fair, as consistent as the report that we have in front of us.
Then why is contradictory
Time of the gentleman
information
has expired. The
continuing to come
gentleman
out?
from Maryland is recognized.
Director Mueller, let's go to a fourth episode of obstruction of justice in the form of witness tampering, which is urging witnesses not to cooperate with law enforcement, either by persuading them or intimidating them. Witness tampering is a felony punishable by 20 years in prison. You found evidence that the president engaged in efforts, and I quote, to encourage witnesses not to cooperate with the investigation. Is that right?
That's correct. Do you have a citation?
I'm page 7 on volume 2.
Thank you.
Now, one of these witnesses was Michael Cohen, the president's personal lawyer, who ultimately pled guilty to campaign violations based on secret hush money payments to two women the president knew, and also to lying to Congress about the hoped-for $1 billion Trump Tower deal. After the FBI searched Cohen's home, the president called him up personally, he said, to check in, and told him to, quote, hang in there and stay strong. Is that right? Do you remember finding that?
If it's in the report as stated, yes, it is right.
Yes, also in the report, actually, are a series of calls made by other friends of the president. One reached out to say he was with the boss in Mar-a-Lago, and the president said, he loves you. His name is redacted.
With the boss.
Another redacted friend called to say, the boss loves you, and a third redacted friend called to say, everyone knows the boss has your back. Do you remember finding that
The
sequence of
boss.
calls?
Generally, yes.
When
The
the
boss
news,
loves you es
and in fact,
como
Cohen
el
said
abrazo
that
del oso a esta
following
altura.
the receipt of these messages, I'm
Big
quoting
brother
here,
loves you.
page 147 in volume 2, he believed he had the support of the White House if he continued to toe the party line, and he determined to stay on message and be part of the team. That's at page 147. Do you remember generally finding that?
Generally, yes.
Well, Robert Costello, a lawyer close to the president's legal team, emailed Cohen to say, quote, you are loved, they are in our corner, sleep well tonight, and you have friends in high places, and that's up on the screen, page 147. You remember reporting that. Okay. Now, when the news first broke that Cohen had arranged payoffs to Stormy Daniels, Cohen faithfully stuck to this party line. He said that publicly that neither the Trump organization nor the Trump campaign was a party to the transaction, and neither reimbursed him. Trump's personal attorney at that point quickly texted Cohen to say, quote, "Client says thank you for what you do." Mr. Mueller, who is the capital C client thanking Cohen for what he does?
I can't speak to that.
Okay, the assumption in the context suggests very strongly it's President Trump.
I can't speak to that.
Okay. Cohen later broke and pled guilty to campaign finance offenses and admitted fully they were made, quote, "at the direction of candidate Trump." Do you remember that?
Yes.
After Cohen's guilty plea, the president suddenly changed his tune towards Mr. Cohen, didn't he?
I would say I rely on what's in the report.
Well, he made the suggestion that Cohen family members had committed crimes. He targeted, for example, Cohen's father-in-law and repeatedly suggested that he was guilty of committing crimes, right?
Generally accurate.
Okay. On page 154, you give a powerful summary of these changing dynamics. And you said, I'm happy to have you read it, but I'm happy to do it if not.
I have it in front of me, thank you.
Would you like to read it?
I would.
Can you read it out loud to everybody?
I would be happy to have you read it out.
Okay, very, very. We'll read it at the same time. The evidence concerning this sequence of events could support an inference that the president used inducements in the form of positive messages in an effort to get Cohen not to cooperate, and then turn to attacks and intimidation to deter the provision of information or to undermine Cohen's credibility once Cohen began cooperating.
En este momento están construyendo los contornos alrededor de otro de los cargos de obstrucción a la justicia, que tiene que ver con el witness tampering, que en castellano se dice
como cocinar el testimonio.
Como manipulación de testigos, algo así, claro. Que tiene que ver con agarrar testigos de un juicio en tu contra y decirles que lo correcto, o amenazarlos que testigan en tu contra, o darles un camino como de cosas buenas que van a pasar si testigan en tu favor. Y ese es uno de los más o menos 3 o 4 cargos bien claros que el informe Mueller hace con respecto a Trump, donde básicamente demuestra obstrucción a la justicia y que son cargos que son perfectamente perseguibles.
Incluso el escenario de Trump perdiendo, porque el peor escenario es que